My ex's sister texted me to fix her leaking attic. I told myself it was just a job. Then she looked me dead in the eye and said, "I liked you before my sister ever left." What started as a simple repair turned into the moment I stopped believing I was the boring one and started believing someone had been quietly wanting me the whole time. This is the story of a cracked roof, one honest kiss, a family that nearly tore it apart, and a woman brave enough to say exactly what she meant. Stay till the end because that attic tells the whole truth. When my ex's older sister texted me asking if I still did handyman work on the side, I almost didn't answer. Not because I was busy. Not because I didn't know how to reroute a water-damaged attic beam, patch a chimney flashing, or replace insulation without disturbing 40-year-old wiring. What stopped me was seeing her name light up my phone after 11 months of silence. Marissa Cole, my ex-girlfriend's older sister. The one who used to slide me a second helping of dinner before anyone noticed the first plate was empty. The one who caught my eye across the table during arguments and mouthed, "It's not you," like she needed me to know that before I convinced myself otherwise. The one who, on the night everything ended, hugged me a beat too long at the door and said, low enough that only I heard it, "Don't let this make you smaller, Theo." I'd thought about that sentence more times than I wanted to admit. And if I was honest with myself, somewhere underneath the sentence, I'd thought about her a little too. The warmth of her, standing that close, for just a second too long, the smell of her shampoo, the way her hand had rested on my arm like it belonged there. My name is Theo Marsh. I was 32, ran a small property maintenance business out of Richmond. 3 guys, a beat-up box truck, a reputation for showing up on time and doing the job right the first go-round. I'd built that business from nothing over 6 years, the kind of quiet, unglamorous success that never once impressed the people I most wanted it to impress. Priya and I had been together 2.5 years. We met at a mutual friend's engagement party. Back when I still believed steady meant safe and safe meant wanted. It ended in a restaurant parking lot on her birthday, of all the places, with her 2 glasses of wine in and finally saying the thing she'd apparently been holding for months. "I keep waiting for you to want something bigger, and you never do." I asked her what bigger was supposed to look like. She didn't have an answer. She had a feeling, restless, dissatisfied, the kind that doesn't need logic to justify itself. And I had apparently failed to match it for 2.5 years without either of us saying so out loud until that parking lot, under a flickering streetlight, with her cake going soft in its box on the hood of my truck. I didn't argue. I never was much of an arguer, something Priya used to call a compliment early on and a complaint by the end. Like the same trait could curdle just by aging in the wrong relationship. I drove her home. I carried the cake to her door because she'd forgotten it. I let the whole thing end without a scene, because scenes had never once fixed anything I'd seen broken in my life. 3 months later, I heard through a mutual friend that she'd taken a consulting job 2 states over. Good for her, I told myself, and meant it on the good days. On the worst ones, I hoped the new job asked more of her than I ever had. And that bigger turned out to be exactly as exhausting as it usually is. Marissa hadn't reached out after the breakup. That had felt right to me. She was Priya's sister, not mine, and there are boundaries decent people respect, even when the affection underneath them had gotten a little complicated somewhere along the way, long before either of us admitted it to ourselves. Marissa and I had always gotten along too easily, in the specific way that makes you feel guilty even when you haven't done anything. Not in any way either of us acted on, not back then. Just easily. The kind of easy where you catch yourself directing a joke toward one particular person at a crowded table without quite meaning to. And then avoid her eyes for the rest of the night so nobody notices you did it on purpose. So when her text came through on a gray Tuesday afternoon, "Hey, weird question. Does your offer to look at things still stand?" I sat with my thumb hovering over the screen for a long, stupid 30 seconds before I answered. "Depends on the thing," I typed. "Attics leaking into my closet. 2 guys already quoted me and ghosted. I'll pay real rates, promise." I told myself it was just a leak. A job like 100 others I'd done for strangers who found me through a website. I did not need to change my shirt before driving over. I changed my shirt anyway. Twice, actually. I'm not proud of that detail, but this is a story about honesty, so I'm including it Marissa's place was a narrow two-story rental on the edge of downtown, the kind of building with a lot of character and none of the insulation to justify it. I'd been there once before, years back, dragged along to a housewarming by Priya, who'd spent the whole night annoyed that her sister's apartment had better light than her own. One of 100 small resentments I hadn't understood the size of until much later. Marissa answered the door in paint-stained overalls, dark hair falling loose from a knot at the back of her neck, holding a flashlight like it might double as a weapon. When she smiled at me, something low in my chest pulled tight in a way I had no business feeling standing in a doorway on a Tuesday afternoon. "You came," she said, like she genuinely hadn't been sure I would. "You said real rates." I lied. It's frozen pizza and my eternal, undying gratitude. She stepped back to let me in, close enough that I caught the smell of her. Vanilla and turpentine, an odd, specific combination I'd remember for far longer than made any sense for a first hello. The leak turned out to be worse than she'd let on over text. A crack flashing around an old roof vent, water tracking slowly down a rafter and pooling directly above the closet where she kept, in her words, "every coat I own and my grandmother's quilts. So please don't let this become a whole dramatic thing." I spent the better part of an hour up in that attic while she stood at the base of the ladder, handing tools up before I even had to ask. That detail caught me. It's a small thing, but it means someone's paid attention before. To someone at some point doing exactly this kind of work, watching what a person reaches for before they reach for it. "You don't have to babysit the ladder," I called down at one point, mostly to hear her voice again. "If you fall through my ceiling, I'm the one who has to explain to Priya why her ex died in my attic." A pause, her voice quieter than before. "I have a vested interest in keeping you around a while longer, Theo." I came down slower than I strictly needed to, just to have another minute in that cramped, dusty space with her looking up at me like that, like I was worth watching. She'd made coffee, unprompted, and remembered I took it black, no sugar. A detail Priya used to guess wrong nearly every single time, and then act faintly offended when corrected, like my coffee order was somehow a criticism of her memory rather than a fact about mine. "You remembered that," I said, closer to her than the moment strictly called for. "I remember a lot of things about you," she said, not stepping back an inch. Occupational hazard of being the sister who actually pays attention at dinner instead of narrating her own week the whole time. I didn't touch that. It felt like touching it would mean agreeing to something neither of us had said out loud yet, and I wasn't ready, not yet, to be the one who said it first. We sat at her kitchen table while the sealant cured, knees almost touching under the small table, both of us very carefully pretending not to notice. She asked about the business, how many guys I had on now, whether I still did the old house restoration work I used to talk about at family dinners. Back when Priya would roll her eyes at me getting too excited about original woodwork. I asked about her design work, and she lit up in a way I hadn't seen from her in years, talking about branch our project for a local bakery like it was the most interesting thing in the world. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed someone that a small thing actually mattered. Somewhere in the middle of it, I asked the question I probably shouldn't have. Did she talk about me after? Marissa turned her mug slowly, her eyes flicking up to mine, something soft and a little sad in them. "She said you were solid, dependable." A pause, her voice dropping. She said it like a complaint. I never understood that. I always thought steady was the rarest thing a person could be, and she treated it like a consolation prize. The way she said it, quiet, certain, looking right at me without flinching, did something to the air in that kitchen that had nothing to do with the leak upstairs, and everything to do with the way she hadn't looked away once during the whole conversation. I left that afternoon telling myself the attic was fixed, or close enough, and that whatever I'd felt sitting at that table was just gratitude wearing an unfamiliar shirt. I did not entirely believe myself, but I drove home anyway, and I did not call her that night, and I counted that as a victory of self-control that lasted exactly 4 days. The second visit happened because the seal needed checking after a storm, or that's what I told myself in the truck on the way over. It had held fine. I stayed 2 hours anyway, replacing a stuck window latch that had nothing whatsoever to do with any of it because leaving, for the first time in a long while, felt like the harder thing to do. She sat up on the counter while I worked, her bare feet swinging near my hip, close enough that I had to consciously keep my eyes on the latch and not on the line of her collarbone where her shirt had slipped slightly off one shoulder. "People are going to say something," she said. "If you keep coming by like this, let them, Theo." Her voice dropped, and when I looked up, she wasn't joking anymore. Her eyes had gone serious in a way that made my hands go still on the latch. "It's not just the attic anymore, is it?" I set the screwdriver down slowly. She was close now, close enough that I could see her breath catch when I didn't answer right away. Close enough to see the small, nervous way she was biting the inside of her cheek, waiting for me to say something, anything. "No," I said finally. "It's not just that. I need you to know something." She slid down off the counter, and we were standing a breath apart, closer than either of us had let ourselves get before. Close enough that neither of us could pretend anymore that this was about a leaking roof or a stuck window. "I liked you before Priya ever left. I just didn't have anywhere to put it. So I put it away, and I told myself it was nothing, and I got very good at believing that for a whole year. I noticed you too," I admitted, my voice rougher than I meant it to come out. "The night you told me not to let it make me smaller. I've thought about that, about you, longer than I should have, longer than felt allowed." "How much longer?" Her eyes hadn't left mine, and there was something almost daring in the question, like she wanted the whole truth and nothing softened. "Long enough that standing here right now feels less like a line I'm crossing," I said, "and more like one I should have crossed a long time ago." Neither of us moved for a second. Then her hand found the front of my shirt, not pulling, just resting there, feeling my pulse pick up hard under her palm, and I watched something like relief pass over her face, like she'd needed to feel it to believe it was real. "If we do this," she said quietly, "we do it honestly. No sneaking around. No pretending it's smaller than it is, no telling ourselves it's just a rebound or a mistake or a stress reaction to your sister leaving. I've had enough of things being smaller than they actually are." "I don't want smaller," I said. "I never wanted smaller. I want this, exactly like this, exactly this honest, no matter how complicated it gets." When I finally kissed her, it wasn't rushed. It was the kind of slow that comes from two people who'd both spent a long time not letting themselves want something, finally letting the wanting win. Her hand slid up into my hair, mine settled at the small of her back, and the kitchen, the whole ordinary, unfinished afternoon, narrowed down to just the warmth of her mouth and the small, satisfied sound she made against my lips, like something in her had finally exhaled after holding its breath for a very long time. We didn't rush past that first kiss into anything more that day. We didn't need to. What we had instead was better, in its own way. The ache of not yet, the promise sitting warm between us every time her fingers brushed mine over the following weeks. Every lingering hug that lasted a few seconds longer than friendship required. Every late-night phone call that ended in comfortable silence. Neither of us wanted to hang up on, both of us just listening to the other breathe on the line like that was enough. For 3 weeks, it was ours alone. And I want to be honest that those were some of the best 3 weeks of my adult life. We didn't tell anyone. We met for coffee in neighborhoods where neither of us knew people. She showed up at a job site once with lunch for me and my crew, and my guys teased me about it for a week afterward, in a way that felt, for once, like something to be teased about instead of something to defend. But secrets like that have a shelf life, especially in a town the size of Richmond, especially with a sister as sharp as Priya, who noticed things the way Marissa noticed things. It apparently ran in the family, just aimed in very different directions. Priya found out the way these things always seem to find their way out into the open. A mutual friend mentioned my truck outside Marissa's place twice in 1 week. At a barbecue, nobody thought Priya was actually paying attention at. She called her sister within the hour, and from what Marissa told me after, it wasn't a calm conversation. She asked if I was doing this to get back at her. Marissa said, sitting on her porch steps that night, close enough that her shoulder rested against mine in the dark, her voice still a little unsteady from the call. "What'd you say?" I said the world doesn't actually revolve around her decisions, and it was frankly a little insulting that she thought a leaking attic was secretly, somehow, about her ego. Marissa smiled faintly into the dark, though I could hear it cost her something. She didn't love that answer, She said some things about me that weren't kind. Like what? Marissa was quiet a moment. That I've always wanted what she has, that I'm settling for her leftovers because I couldn't get anyone of my own. Her voice wobbled slightly on that last part, and I felt something protective and furious rise up in my chest on her behalf. That's not true, I said, turning to face her fully. None of that is true, Marissa, and you know it isn't. I know, she said. It still landed. You're not her leftovers, I said, taking her face gently in both hands. You were never a leftover of anything. You're the first thing in a long time that's felt like it was actually meant for me instead of something I had to earn. She kissed me then, harder than before, like she needed to feel something true after a phone call full of things that weren't. I kissed her back the same way, one hand sliding into her hair, the other pulling her close against me on that porch step, both of us a little breathless when we finally broke apart. I'm not sorry, she said against my mouth. Not about this. Not ever about this. Good, I said, because neither am I. Priya and I talked once, briefly on the phone, both of us stiff and careful with each other, in a way we'd never quite managed even while we were together. I don't understand you two, she said, and I could hear that she meant it as an accusation more than a genuine question. You don't have to understand it, I said. But you don't get to be the reason. Marissa feels ashamed of something she didn't do wrong. You left, Priya. You don't get to decide what happens to me, or to her, after you're the one who walked away. She was quiet for a long moment on the other end. I called you boring once, at the end. I don't think I meant it the way it sounded. I think you did, actually, and it's okay. You wanted different things than I did, and wanting different things isn't a crime. But you don't get veto power over what happens after you leave, and you definitely don't get to punish your sister for noticing what you decided to walk past. She didn't argue with that. It was the first time in the entire 2.5 years I could remember her not having something ready to say back. There was one hard night I need to tell you about, because this isn't a story where everything went smoothly, and it would be dishonest to pretend it did. 3 weeks after that call with Priya, Marissa pulled back. Not dramatically, a few unanswered texts, a canceled cough, a vague swamped with a deadline rain check that didn't quite match the version of her I'd started to know, the version who texted back within the hour even at midnight. I gave her the space at first, telling myself it was a deadline, the way you tell yourself things when you're not ready to hear the alternative. After 4 days of it, I drove over, because some things are better said face-to-face than typed into a message thread that either of us could delete without consequence. She let me in looking tired in a way that had nothing to do with any deadline. I need to say something, she said, before I'd even set my keys down on her counter. And I need you to actually hear it instead of just being nice about it, because being nice about it is what got me here. Okay, I said, and I meant it. I sat down across from her at that same kitchen table where all of this had started. What if this only works? Because I'm the not Priya, she said, arms crossed tight over her chest like she was bracing for me to prove her right, her voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. What if in a year, or 5, you look at me and see everything you wanted from her instead of everything you actually want from me? What if I'm just easier because I'm not her, and easier isn't the same thing as right? It was a fair fear, and I didn't rush to talk her out of it, because rushing would have proven her point more than answering it. I sat with the question the way it deserved to be sat with. I've thought about that too, I said finally. Genuinely. Not just to reassure you, actually thought it some nights when I couldn't sleep. And here's what I keep landing on. I didn't fall for a version of Priya. I fell for the way you handed up a wrench before I asked. The way you remembered my coffee without making a show of it. The way you told me the truth about your own sister instead of managing me the way she always managed everyone in that family. The way you kissed me like you meant it instead of like you were settling for something safe and available. None of that is a Priya-shaped hole I'm filling. It's just you, Marissa. All you. It was always going to be you. Whether or not Priya had ever existed at all, I just didn't have the right to know it while she was still in the picture. Marissa exhaled shakily, tears finally spilling over that she'd clearly been holding back the whole conversation. I needed to hear you actually think about it, she said, instead of just saying the reassuring thing. I know the difference, I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I've had enough practice being handed the reassuring thing instead of the true one in this exact family to know I never want to do that to you. When I kissed her that time, it wasn't slow or careful the way the first one had been. It was certain, both of us finally done being scared of how much we wanted each other, her hands fisting in my shirt, mine cradling the back of her head like I could somehow hold the doubt out of her by holding her close enough. It took Priya the better part of a year to sit across a table from both of us without her jaw going visibly tight every time Marissa or I said something to each other directly, the way couples do without thinking about it. She got there eventually. Showed up to Marissa's birthday dinner stiff at first, arms crossed through the appetizer course, answering questions in clipped half-sentences that made the whole table hold its breath. Then, a little less stiff after Marissa burned the garlic bread badly enough to set off the smoke alarm, and I ended up standing on a kitchen chair, disconnecting it with a dish towel while all three of us laughed harder than the situation strictly warranted, out on the back steps, afterward waiting for the smoke to clear from the kitchen. "This is so weird," Priya said, half locking despite herself, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's a little weird," Marissa agreed, leaning into my shoulder without thinking about it. "The unconscious way you lean into someone once something has stopped being new and started being simply true. We're allowed to let it be weird and fine at the same time. Both things can be true, Priya. Weird doesn't automatically mean wrong." Priya looked at the two of us for a long moment, really looked, not the sideways glances she'd been giving all night, and something in her face shifted, not into approval exactly, but into something quieter and more honest. Acceptance, maybe, or at least the willingness to stop fighting a thing that clearly wasn't going anywhere, no matter how hard she pushed against it. "He always did remember the little things," she said finally to Marissa, not to me, like it was easier to say it to her sister than directly to my face. "I used to think that was boring. I don't think that anymore. I think I was scared of it, actually, if I'm being honest for once." Marissa reached over and squeezed her sister's hand across the table. Nobody said anything else about it. Nobody needed to. Some apologies don't need the actual word to land where they're supposed to. The months after that dinner were quieter, in the good way. This Sloan, we met each other's friends properly. Marissa came to a job site opening with me and charmed my entire crew within 20 minutes, remembering every one of their names by the end of the afternoon. I met her parents over a long, easy Sunday dinner where her father, a retired contractor himself, spent 45 minutes interrogating me about framing techniques and seemed, by dessert, cautiously satisfied with my answers. We moved in together the following spring, into a house with a roof that for once didn't leak. A detail we both found funnier than it probably was, given how we started. 2 years after that first crack in the flashing let rainwater into a closet that wasn't mine to fix, I asked Marissa to marry me in that same attic. Dry now, finished, insulated properly, the one beam I'd replaced still a shade lighter than the others, if you knew exactly where to look for it, the way you know exactly where to look for the parts of a person that used to be broken. "This attic caused a lot of trouble," she said, laughing through tears, her fingers tracing the lighter wood in the low evening light coming through the small window I'd installed the summer before. "No," I said, pulling her against me, my mouth finding hers one more time, slow and certain. It just finally told the truth about something that was already there the whole time, waiting for both of us to stop pretending we didn't see it. She said yes against my lips, certain, unhurried, like a woman who'd already decided, long before I ever got around to asking, and had simply been waiting, patiently, for me to catch up to what she already knew. People ask sometimes how we ended up together. Out of all the strange, complicated ways two people can find each other. Marissa usually says, "He fixed my roof." I usually say, "She noticed me first." Both of those things are true. Neither one is the whole story. The whole story is that Priya looked at steady and called it boring, and her own sister looked at that exact same steadiness and finally said the quiet part out loud. "That's not a flaw, Theo. That's a foundation." And somewhere in a dusty attic with bad flashing and 40-year-old wiring, next to a woman brave enough to want me honestly and say so out loud, I stopped believing that being the reliable one automatically meant being the forgettable one. Sometimes the person who finally sees you clearly isn't the one who had you first. Sometimes it's the one who was quietly paying attention the whole time, waiting for you to notice her noticing. And once you finally do, nothing about the wanting ever feels small again. What would you have done if your ex's sister called you to fix her green attic and it turned into something neither of you expected? Has someone ever finally valued the part of you that someone else once dismissed as boring? Tell me in the comments, and if you like this one, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.